That's okay.
Good morning, everyone. I call this meeting of the Public Accounts Committee to order. I'd like to welcome everyone here. This is our first meeting since the election, and I would like to remind everyone to place their phones on silent. I do that before every meeting so that we avoid interruptions. And I would like to ask members to introduce themselves, beginning with Mr. McKay.
And McKay, representing Chester St. Margaret's.
Brendan McGuire, Halifax Atlantic.
Benjamin Jessam, Hammonds Plains, Lucasville.
Lonis Croft, Lunenburg.
Gordon Wilson, Clare Digby.
Good morning. My name is Tim Houston. I'm the MLA for Pictou East.
Lisa Roberts, Halifax Needham.
Thank you. And I'm Alan McMaster, MLA for Inverness, your chair. We also have with us today the Auditor General.
Hi, Michael Pickup, Auditor General.
And I'll have our committee clerk introduce herself today.
Good morning, Kim Langell, committee clerk.
Thank you. Just a point on microphones. They're probably all best to keep them in the same spot. And I remember my first public accounts meeting, I think I was shouting into the mic. Nobody has done that today. So, but the mics work very well as long as we leave them in the sort of the same position. So today's meeting is largely about explaining how the committee works. It'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions. We have the Auditor General here and our Legislative Counsel who will be offering comments later on. And some of you have been on the committee already, so there's nothing really new here for you. However, I thought it would be good for us all to get together to have this meeting. And so we'll start with some basic housekeeping items. As you've seen, before you came to this meeting, you received a package of information. And that is something that you will receive before every meeting. When we call a witness, information is prepared by the Legislative Library and by our clerk's office to provide to us. Our mandate states that the Public Accounts Committee is established for the purpose of reviewing the public accounts, the annual report, or other reports of the Auditor General, and any other financial matters respecting the public funds of the province. I'll speak about this later, but we have an offer from the Department of Finance who has offered to come in. Perhaps not all of us are familiar with going over the financial statements of government. There may be line items that we may have questions on. That will be an opportunity for you to gain a better understanding of how this public expenditure is reported so that you can ask questions. Our meeting is weekly. We have an average of around 25 to 30 meetings per year, so we meet quite frequently. We're probably one of the busier committees of the Legislature. And we have, for myself as chair, sometimes I'm called to rule on items. I can consult with our Legislative Counsel to get support for a decision, a particular decision or other. And I do rely on that advice because I do aim to be fair. We all come to this committee representing our own political parties, but as chair, I certainly make as good an effort as I can. And I have been questioned in the past, and I expect that may be the case in the future. But my aim is to be fair and to follow the rules. And I do call upon the Legislative Counsel to provide me advice from time to time. We also, of course, have the Auditor General as a frequent and very regular guest here at our meetings, and members have the opportunity to ask questions of the Auditor General from time to time. Our meetings are televised and they're live streamed now. So, of course, our dress is important. It's similar to what we would wear if we were in the Legislature. As I mentioned about the microphones, they are best left in the same position, and they work quite well when they're in that position. Similar to the way the legislature operates, in this case, when members wish to speak, they call for my attention, I will recognize you. Although typically our meetings are quite structured. Each caucus is given the same amount of time to ask questions, and usually it's divided up as each caucus sees fit. And it's always in the order of the official opposition, followed by the NDP, and followed by the government members. So there are typically 2 rounds of questioning. Usually the first round begins after a short introduction from whoever our witness is. So each caucus has 20 minutes. And then there's a second round, it's usually around 14 minutes. And then our guests have a chance to provide closing comments. So every meeting is run like that, in that structure, with that structure. Just another point on the microphones. You'll see I have a red light on my microphone. Always wait until your light comes on before you speak. That's important so that we hear what you say, but also so that it can be transcribed by Hansard, because it becomes part of the public record. We had a meeting of the subcommittee of this committee recently, where topics were put forward. You will have an opportunity to vote on those topics later today. The purpose of the subcommittee is for organizational purposes, and in this case, topics were selected, voted upon by the subcommittee to go to the full committee here today. So we had met recently on that. That meeting is in camera. Sometimes we will have meetings in camera, and that means that what is said in the room stays in the room. And that's for the protection of all members, so members can feel they can speak freely. We have had a couple of incidents in the past where, and I believe it was truly by accident, that members may have referenced a comment made during an in-camera meeting. Because those meetings were held on the same day, we had an in-camera before we had our full public meeting. And that's just something I bring to your attention. If something is said in camera, we ask that you keep it confidential within the room here for everybody's benefit. Our subcommittee has been formed, and that includes Mr. Tim Houston, member of the official opposition, the Honourable Dave Wilson as member of the NDP Caucus, and the Vice Chair, which is Mr. Gordon Wilson of the Liberal Caucus, and myself as Chair. In the past, sometimes there have been just 3 members in the committee. I feel it is better that I stay as Chair, and that perhaps the wishes of the PC Caucus are represented by Mr. Houston, which allows me to stay, I think, more independent. And it's worked well, and I think everyone has agreed to that format. If there's any concerns or questions about that, you can certainly raise them whenever you wish. I've got lots of notes here. I'm trying to go through them quickly for you. Another point, and for those of you who will be new to the legislature as well, questions are actually directed through the chair. I do like to be flexible on that. I don't mind when members are asking witnesses questions if there's a bit of going back and forth. I am fine with that as long as it remains respectful. If the questioning maybe becomes too aggressive or takes on a tone that's inappropriate, or the answers take on a tone that's inappropriate, I will call, as I have in the past, either members of the committee or witnesses to task on that, and ask that they return to a dialogue that is more befitting of the committee. And so questions technically are directed through me, but I don't mind if you direct them if you're looking at the witnesses, because in a lot of cases, questions build off the answers, and I think it's important for a free flow of that communication to take place. Here's a point that was raised by our clerk's office, and that is if members are referencing a document that they are intending to table, please make an effort to have copies made and brought with you for the meeting. If you are referencing something that other members may wish to look at while you're referencing it, it helps that those members have a chance to look at it as you're referencing it. So please do your best on that, and we can make copies at the last minute, but the preference is for you to have them with you. And sometimes people may be bringing a large document, and it's impossible to copy them in a short amount of time for everyone. Many of the topics that we will discuss for this committee are topics that will be put forward by members on the committee. We have, as I mentioned before, our legislative library, which provides research services for us, and our clerk's office, which provides information for us. And perhaps caucuses are doing their own research as well on topics that are brought forward. And that will be the case many times, but we also have an Auditor General's office who has, I believe it's about 40 people? 35 people working in the Auditor General's office. And they are writing reports. They are auditing services of government. We have the opportunity to select topics that the Auditor General raises in his reports for our meetings here, which brings with it all of that research that comes from those 35 people. It's very thorough, it's in depth, and so those are topics that the subcommittee considers when it puts topics forward to our committee. So I know the Auditor General will speak about that later today. So there's essentially two sources for our witnesses. One is from our own wishes, but we also have the opportunity to call upon reports that the Auditor General has prepared. And not only do we ask the Auditor General questions about those reports, but when we bring the department in who is relevant in the report, then you have the opportunity to ask the department questions. And these reports are thorough, as I mentioned, and perhaps most importantly, they hold recommendations that departments have agreed to. And oftentimes we do follow-up reports to see if the departments have followed through on the recommendations that they have accepted and agreed to. So, and I will let the Auditor General speak more about that in a moment. We often do, when we have witnesses who are brought in based on Auditor General reports, we often have in-camera meetings with the Auditor General where you can ask questions freely and privately, certainly privately, at least within our committee, to help inform you before we say bring the department in to ask questions. So I think at this point, if perhaps I've not explained too much of that, I will turn the table over to our Auditor General, Mr. Michael Pickup, and he can provide you with some comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Pickup.
Oh, I didn't wait for the red light. I'm already not following instructions. My apologies. If I seem to be looking down a fair bit, my apologies as well. I forgot my regular glasses today, so I'm using the backup pair that were on my desk from the pharmacy. So it's a bit awkward to look at my papers. But I wasn't going to say too many things, partially because I just want to focus on a few things. But also, I had the opportunity after the election. I extended an offer to each of the three major caucuses to come in and meet with the entire caucus or those who wanted to meet. So I had a chance to do that. Two of the caucuses took me up on that. So I had a chance to meet with most of the members in those caucuses and essentially go over things like the role of the office of the Auditor General, and many of those types of aspects. And I know at least with one of the new members, I've had a chance to chat with her individually as well. And so I'm always available to a full caucus or to a partial caucus, to new members only, to do separate information sessions. But I really want to try and be demand driven rather than supply oriented, and try to meet needs only if they're there and not just look for things to do, if you will, because we have enough things to do. So I'm really letting you folks drive the bus in terms of if you want us to come and do things, let us know. I would also extend that, I think, to the chair and to the vice chair as well. If you want to meet outside of this, or you want to have discussions in terms of what are things you may want from us You know, what are things you may want us to do differently? I think we've had some good interaction over the past, with the previous Public Accounts Committee over the past 3 years in terms of the way we report and things we could do to streamline reporting, to make it more efficient for you, to make it easier for you. You know, it's hard for us to be in your shoes if you don't help us to know what it's like to be in those shoes and how we can help you do your job. So I always tell people, you know, the organizations that we audit are the organizations that we audit. Our client is the House, and secondly would be the Public Accounts Committee. So I'm very much driven by that. So I have all kinds of ideas on ways that we might help the committee. I know most of the members are returning, but that doesn't diminish the opportunities or what I'm willing to do, including, for example, the former CCAF, which is now the Canadian Auditing and Accountability Foundation. They will have available, because there was an election and there's a new PAC, they will have available one free training session where they would come down and meet with PAC members and sort of tailor some training. But I have said to them not to reach out directly to PAC until I've had some discussion. And Mr. Chair, I don't know how you want that discussion to happen, whether it's you and the Vice Chair or whether it's at a subcommittee meeting. But, you know, again, I want to be demand driven with the CAAF. There's no sense them coming down here, one, and doing a presentation if it's not going to be any use, and two, coming down here and doing a presentation that doesn't meet your needs and everybody leaving and saying, well, that was a half a day or a day wasted that I'll never get back. So none of us want to do that. So I think we need to figure out, you know, how we go about that. I also have other ideas that none of which I'm going to sort of put into place without some discussion. As an example, on our October 4th report that's coming up, we meet early that morning. I mean, we have a subcommittee meeting with you to do in-camera, or we have an in-camera meeting to brief you, and then we go right to the public session. But this year, starting on the October 4th report, rather than an 8:30 a.m. release, we're going to do a 7 a.m. release. So at 7 a.m., the full report will be available. The 2-minute videos will be available per audit, as will the one-page, and this is in response to something that you seem to like, the one-page per report summary will be available at 7 a.m. on the website as well. So all of those things will be available at 7, and then we come over here, I think, for a 9 o'clock or whatever time it is for an in-camera briefing. Something for folks to think about, and again, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure how you want to facilitate this type of sort of discussion and engagement. You know, we are open to doing things like, you know, if members thought that some sort of, you know, us having some sort of working breakfast where we invite people in at 7 or 7:30 to come and, you know, sit down with the folks who do the work and have some discussion pre the in-camera meeting and then still do the in-camera meeting. I know some of my colleagues do that in other jurisdictions. All of those types of things. I mean, I have lots of ideas, but again, there's no sense us going about doing it if you think you know, that's a waste of time or you're not going to take it up. Then there's no point in us doing that. So maybe, Mr. Chair, we can park that for now, but look to have discussions as you see fit in terms of going forward and ideas we might have to serve you better. I would also hope that as we move from the October 4th report, we can engage somehow, and whether that's through the chair and vice chair, on a discussion on very quickly on lessons learned to say, okay, just after that report, what would have made it better for you? You know, and I think the one page has responded to some of that. The videos have to some extent, but you know, communication and all of this stuff is constantly changing, and it's different for everybody. So if we can quickly do different things that don't cost us too much, that we can turn around rather quickly in how we present our results to you and how we get that to help you better do your job at Public Accounts Committee, you know, certainly all ears on that. So that was that sort of first bucket that I wanted to talk about. The next one was on the handout that I brought copies of for everybody. It was on the coverage over the last 3 years. So I'll provide that with all due respect as information as you decide going forward as to what you might want to look at. And I think this very quick picture shows that if you go to the far right as to whether something was called to Public Accounts Committee, it quickly shows how much of our work has been called. So if you look at the 2016 work we did, most of it has not been called to Public Accounts Committee, which, I mean, I'll be honest, with all due respect to how you set your agenda, I mean, some of those are topics that I would hope that would be called to Public Accounts Committee in terms of witnesses being called in to discuss these things. And you know, it's always risky, I guess, to point examples out, but when you look at things like critical infrastructure, licensed childcare, and topics like that, species at risk, you know, I think they're all significant topics. Anyway, I say that with all due respect to say I hope the Public Accounts Committee will consider those. I just came back, as some of you know. I was at the, see if I get this right, the Canadian Council of Legislative Auditors and Canadian Council of Public Accounts Committee joint annual meeting in Fredericton. I don't know if it's on your behalf, but I explained to your colleagues from across the country from Public Accounts Committee and to the Auditors General from across the country that were in attendance of the situation in Nova Scotia, where there was just recently an election and a Public Accounts Committee was recently formed, because Nova Scotia was one of the 2 jurisdictions that didn't have anybody from Public Accounts Committee in attendance at the meeting. So I explained that to folks, you know, with all due respect to the committee, of course, and to what happened. So it was Nova Scotia and BC who weren't able to have anybody at the committee meetings. So I bring that up, the public that conference, because I was asked to be on a panel discussion about what I see as the role of Public Accounts Committee in terms of the financial statements of the government, the public accounts, if you will. And I guess it lines up very nicely with the name of the committee, Public Accounts Committee, Public Accounts of Nova Scotia, Financial Statements of Nova Scotia. And one of the things, and I think I have forwarded to you folks the presentation that I did, and certainly I made it clear to the audience, because there was myself, and then there was the chair of the Public Accounts Committee of Alberta, the Auditor General of Alberta. So the 3 of us were on the panel talking about the role of Public Accounts Committee, and you know, certainly I expressed to that group quite clearly that I thought last year there were excellent questions when we came to Public Accounts Committee on the result of our financial work. You know, I had a Hansard summary by types of questions, and there were 49 questions posed to us in a 2-hour session on the financial statements. And but I did say that, you know, the one disappointment that I had, and the one thing that I think would have served the Public Accounts Committee better, which for those who were here last year can recall that my answer quite often was, you know, those are great questions for the government, for the people who prepare the financial statements, the people who own those financial statements, and the people who have the more detailed knowledge. So again, I encourage the committee, with all due respect, to call in the government after we do after we present the results of our October 4th report, because I do think we're one of the few jurisdictions in Canada where the people who prepare the statements are now called in to explain the financial statements and take questions. And in fairness to you folks, I mean, I'm sure last year you get frustrated with me. that I just don't have the detailed knowledge because I'm not the preparer or the owner. So we do the public accounts of Nova Scotia. It's an $11 billion a year organization. Materiality is over $100 million. So for something to be critical for us, you know, we're starting with $100 million. So if we're asked a detailed question on something that's $500,000 or $1 million, it's very good chances that we didn't even look at that because of the nature of materiality. So anyway, I'll stop on that now because on my feelings on the need to call government, and I do want to bleed that into an area on the October 4th report to say on that October 4th report we have 3 key areas that we're looking at that I really believe that will require government to come and talk about some of those results and some of the findings in those reports. So this is a result, this work is very much a result, a summary type of report. So this is a new type audit work, but it is new summary type reports. So we have 3 chapters. Chapter 1 is the result of all the financial audit work that we did. So we'll be looking at things like, are there significant control deficiencies in the government of Nova Scotia? Is fraud being managed well in the government of Nova Scotia? Are there significant board vacancies that may be at issue? How is disclosure of travel and hospitality working across the government? So big ticket items, and that's just chapter 1. Chapter 2 will be that snapshot of some of the information we extract from the financial statements to highlight to you. It is that one where we've had a discussion in the past on is all of that information is essentially available in the public accounts, in that hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages in the public accounts. And I've engaged with the Public Accounts Committee in the past to say, do you find this report that we're doing useful? You know, is this helpful to you? And one of the things I've heard from the Public Accounts Committee is yes, this is helpful to us. This makes it simple for us. So what we're doing on that chapter 2 is we're focusing on 2 things. What happened in 27? What are the short-term results? And what does that show? And then what do the 10-year trends show? And on the 10-year trends, we're essentially breaking it down into 2 5-year periods to say, let's look at the last 5 years, let's look at the 5 years before that, and 10 years a trend does make. So it'll be the presentation of this information to you. And I think why I bring that up as an example of why you may want government officials in to talk about it is because we're going to present to you the numbers. We're going to present to you the impact of numbers. You know, I won't be taking, obviously, a position on whether I think, for example, debt is good, debt is bad. A deficit this year, in 1 year, is worse than a surplus in another year. What I will talk about in that report is impacts of those, financial impacts, not a judgment call on whether that was good or bad in terms of a surplus or a deficit in any given year. Those are really policy-type questions. Those are discussions for people who hold the government accountable. I will be giving you a tool in this chapter to say, here are some of the key highlights in 12 or 13 pages versus the 400 or 500 pages that are in the public accounts. And then finally, chapter 3 of that report will be on pensions in the public sector. So essentially what we have done, and it's been a project. What we have done is we will be providing to you a summary of the 3 major pension plans covering most of the workers in the public sector in Nova Scotia. So that's the healthcare, the pension plan covering healthcare workers, pension plan covering teachers, and the pension plan covering public service. So that will be presented from an information perspective. We haven't done audits of those organizations, but we are pulling out publicly available information. We're summarizing it into 1 point, and we're doing here is the position these plans are in. Here are the risks to the government. Here are the risks to the people who are in the plans, both who are working in people and both who are retired people as well. In addition, it will summarize key aspects of the MLA pension plan as well, so that people can visually see how the 4 plans may be similar and how the 4 plans may differ as well, and the exposures those plans actually give. So I think there are going to be some, out of that work, there's going to be one or two fundamental public policy type discussions that probably should happen as a result of that. So this information piece is meant to feed into that, and we'll talk about it on October 4th, but I think there are some very big ticket items there. You know, one of the things that has come out of that is when you look at these plans, in benefits paid over the last 5 years, these plans have paid out $4.2 billion in benefits. So the point of this work is, you know, workers, Nova Scotians, the economy depend on these pension plans being in good shape and continuing in the future, because they are significant in terms of even the assets they're managing, close to $17 billion in assets being managed by these three pension plans, so huge dollars involved. So I guess, you know, from a finance perspective, you know, if that, in my view, something that size has to be of interest to the Public Accounts Committee, in my view, given, you know, also there are about 110,000 Nova Scotians in those pension plans, either as retirees or workers directly. That doesn't include the spin-off if every one of those workers have a family or somebody else who is impacted. All of a sudden, we're getting closer to 200,000 people. You know, there's only 700,000 Nova Scotians over the age of 20. So we're talking a large percentage of the population who are directly or indirectly impacted by these pensions. So anyway, all of that to say that's what's coming on October 4th, and I look forward to more discussion, be it with the chair and vice chair or the subcommittee or the whole committee, on how we can continue to serve and I hope better serve and continually improve how we serve you folks in holding the government accountable. And I liked one of the presentations last week at the committee that they were talking about the role of Public Accounts Committee, and it wasn't me who said it, so it was somebody else, but they talked about, you know, public money having no politics. And I thought that was a very interesting perspective from the Public Accounts Committee members in terms of the interest of all of this. So all that to say, I look forward to our next number of years together. I just started year 4 of my mandate, so I'll be around another 7 years, so we'll be working together.
Thank you, Mr. Pickup. And Mr. Pickup, you made a number of recommendations, including the summary of chapters that have been called the public accounts, and those that have and those that have not. Is it, for members' benefit, is it appropriate for members to ask your office to recommend to your office to investigate specific issues in government or departments in government?
So if I understand the question, if the Public Accounts Committee has a concern or issue that they want us to look at, I think is your question. So very often, and it's already happened with this season with the new legislature in place, you know, members will call me and want to come in, you know, directly to talk about an issue, which I generally am very responsive to sit down and talk and say, you know, we'll look at this to see how that impacts our plans. So it can be that one-on-one. It can be a resolution, if you will, a request, if you will, from the Public Accounts Committee itself as a group that we would consider. So we get requests all the time. I can tell you that you know, I take all requests seriously, but you know, certainly anytime an MLA calls or is interested in something, frankly, that goes to the top of the list in terms of being responsive and sitting down. Does that mean we always do what you would like? No. Does it mean we sometimes do? But you got to remember, we're doing 10 performance audits a year. We're 35 people, and we're auditing an $11 billion a year organization. So we have to we have to see what we pick. But you know, I will add that the two examples that come to mind that members came to see me about, or different people came to see me about, and that we advanced our work on, is on November we're going to be reporting on mental health and on physician planning, family doctors. So we're reporting on both of those in November, and we advanced those. They were on our list, but we advanced them significantly in terms of timing in response to members' concern over those areas. So we do our best to be responsive, but yeah, don't stop. You know, we're only across the street here, so you know, I'm always available to take requests.
Thank you, and I'm sure our committee will do our best as well to work with your office. Are there any questions for the Auditor General? Okay. Ms. Lonis-Croft.
I just wanted to know, with having the Ottawa group come here to do a workshop, were there any new ideas that they were, or approaches that they were presenting, other than what we have had before?
So part of this really, in my frank, you know, direct view would be, is how brave our members in terms of the training that they want. So if you want sort of an analysis to say, you know, here are examples of, I think, over the last number of years of probably very good type of PAC discussions around issues that PAC, if you follow good practices, likely should be doing. If you want that kind of feedback, or if you want, and likewise on good type of things in terms of discussions, analysis, and I would give that public accounts example. But they have a new guide that came out, but my view would be, you know, we wouldn't want them to come. I mean, it's free in one sense in that they're not going to charge, you get one free, but it's still a cost, right? You don't want them to come to do, in my view, a generic sort of, here's what you should do and here's the way things work. I think, you know, I would be willing, if the chair and vice chair wanted it, to sit down and do a very, very tailored, direct, you know, what do you really need and want? With probably the most of the risk on this to me is, you know, what do you want to hear? You know, do you really want to hear direct, concrete, specific things to Nova Scotia Public Accounts Committee? Or do you want to hear more generic stuff? Or do you want a balance of that, mix of that?
Mr. Gordon Wilson.
Thank you. I'm curious, and this isn't maybe a suggestion, it's just more of a, I wouldn't mind getting your thoughts on if you've ever seen in other public accounts or other areas where there's a witness or an agenda set item that maybe would take multiple sessions to present and discuss. I notice most of our work that we do is, you know, one in, one out, one in, one out, that kind of stuff. But do you have any comment, or have you seen any opportunities where that happens?
I think that's yeah, I think that leads to me into what I would call a great idea. The idea being, you know, if somebody's coming to Public Accounts Committee to talk about one of our audits as an example, and they say, okay, they're going to get through that Public Accounts Committee, they're going to come and chat with you about the results and what they're going to do with the recommendations, then why not, for example, have them back, you know, 6 months, a year later, to say, okay, you know, you were here, you talked about this, you said you were going to do this, give us a short update and come back and chat about things. So I have seen, like when I worked at the in federally for 25 years, the Auditor General of Canada, the organizations that were audited that had a report, they would give a very brief action plan as to what they were going to do with the recommendations, and then they would, PAC would look to have them come back to talk about that. So I think I'm going to use on the November 1st report is going to be our first dedicated full report on the environment, and I think that's going to be a good example, I think, to demonstrate the concept of what you're talking about, because it's going to be probably too much in there for the Department of Environmental officials, in my view, right, to cover that in one session. And probably you'd want to think about strategically having them come back at a few key points.
Do you know if it's ever been done in this legislature within the PAC?
I'm not. I'm trying to think back to the time that I've been here in terms of. I'm sure I would guess, but I don't know. I can't say for sure when and how that's happened.
Thank you.
Move to Mr. Jessam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I just would like some clarification on, I guess, the scope of the Auditor General's office. This committee, as I understand it, we're primarily here to cover the subject of financials with respect to government departments. And I'm just curious, I mean, I see a number of topics. Can you elaborate on kind of what, you know, if there is, what the scope of the Auditor General's office is outside of the financials of the respective witnesses or topics?
Sure. So the mandate of the Office of the Auditor General is very broad. It's the financial audit world that we can look at, of course, with any of the entities in the government reporting, but also it's the performance audit practice. It is looking at how effectively and efficiently government is managing programs and services. So in fact, roughly 70% of the work that my office does is related to this performance audit bucket, if you will, versus the financial statements. So the mandate of the office on anything when we're in the world of government is broad. So it's systems and practices on how things are being managed. So if you look at things, for example, you know, we're into wait times in operating room use, and another day we might be auditing the financial statements of an organization. So fairly broad mandate.
That's great. Thank you.
Mr. Houston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My colleague raised an interesting point about the kind of recurring meetings or whatever, but it made me wonder, what do you see when you look across the country in terms of meeting length? So we meet 9 to 11. Is a couple hours, is that kind of the norm, or what is there a norm? Because it occurs to me that maybe there might be certain topics that are a little meatier that maybe we schedule 9 to 12, or maybe we reserve the right to extend that meeting. You know, sometimes there'll be some that require multiple meetings, but maybe an extra hour sometimes might be helpful too. But so is 2 hours kind of a standard meeting time, or what are your thoughts on that?
So firstly, I mean, I haven't surveyed to know the exact answer to that, but informally, having been in the federal system, I think it was usually common for a 3-hour meeting. Now, I was speaking with the Auditor General of Ontario at the conference last week, and she told me that their Public Accounts Committee, which are generally Wednesdays, are full day. I'm not suggesting that. What I'm saying is, again, I would be demand driven rather than supply oriented. So you tell me what you need in terms of coverage, and then I will make sure that we are here to cover that.
Ms. Roberts and then Ms. Lonis-Croft.
I can't see the Auditor General with that chair.
Do you want me to go this way?
I feel like I have to. Something that strikes me that would be helpful, and I don't know how much work this would require from your staff, but would be to actually extract the recommendations and the commitments from the departments from like a reasonably short, but also reasonably long, like previous 3 years or previous 5 years of audits, and actually break those down by department, because of course, like, we get our critic areas, and they're not done by audit; they're done by department. So I have 7 critic areas, which is a fair number, and I imagine that for each of those departments, there's a number of fairly recent recommendations that it would be worth checking back on, or at least being aware of what those issues are that have been identified, so that we can have those in mind when preparing questions, for example, for budget estimates. That might be all work that I'm supposed to undertake by myself, or with my caucus research staff, each of which also have at least 7 departments that they're responsible for. anyhow, but in my dream world, that would be somehow magically this list would resort itself by department.
In relation to the follow-up work we do, so I have to get this straight in my head because it can get convoluted in my head. So let's see how well I do here. So essentially what we do, we do the performance audit, we make recommendations, we get responses. We wait 2 years and we say, okay, we're not going to follow those recommendations up for 2 years, we'll leave you alone. Then we'll come back and we'll follow up those recommendations for another 2 years. So a 2-year cycle. So, and then what we do is we report to the House on the status of that follow-up. So when I came here in 14, so what we used to do in my first year, for example, is we would report in June. So springtime, we would report on the recommendations and the follow-up based on the status from the previous October that government gave us on recommendations from 2 years before that. So for this year, for example, in February of 18, we will report on the status of roughly 20 audits that were done in 14 and 15 calendar years. See how convoluted that gets for me? So keeping that in my head. So essentially February 2017, we will give you a picture by department, by recommendation, for every recommendation we made, by department, by chapter. So we do it in a few ways. We do it by the organizations, we do it by the calendar years, and we say, okay, if you're in the environment, for example, here are the audits we did in 2014 and 15. We followed up whether the recommendations were complete during the fall of 17, and we report to you in the February of 18. So next February. And what we did on that is that used to be part of just another Auditor General report and with all kinds of other audits. And then working with the committee, the direction I got was you should do a standalone report. So then we started doing this separate report where we just do follow-up.
So in short, you're saying that you already do what I'm asking, what I'm hoping for, and I just haven't figured that out yet.
But I would add, you know what, you're going to give me a chance here to advertise something. So on the November 1st report that when we're doing the environment, we have a new audit on climate change and we have a new audit on environmental assessments. But in there, we're also going to put a summary of here are the audits we did in the area of environment over the last 10 years. Here are the recommendations we made over that period, and here's where they stood the last time we followed them up. So on the environment as a special one, because we're doing this special report just on environment, all of that will be in that chapter. So I'd be interested to see as we go through that November report whether you actually found that helpful or not. Notwithstanding that, we're still going to do the regular dedicated follow-up process. If I could just mention one other thing quickly. I mentioned about talking to the chair and vice chair, and the timing, I guess, is critical because we're reporting October 4th, but I would also extend that invite if people thought it would be useful. Would be more than happy to sit down, have people in the office sit down with your research staff, because I know Public Accounts Committee doesn't have dedicated research staff, but if you want to send some of your researchers over, you know, we could arrange an early morning session, keeping in mind that the folks will talk to them and explain what's in the report. Right, we can't talk to anything more, but we can explain, well, this is what this means, and take questions in a fairly informal way that's not public. But again, if I don't hear from anybody that would be useful, I won't go about organizing it or doing that. I really need to some extent, to work with you to react with what I think you need.
Ms. Lonis-Croft.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd just like to go back over to what the member from Pictou East, correct? Pictou East, said about, and you replied with like some PACs meet day long. From attending the conferences last year, what I learned about a lot of PACs is they only meet when their legislature is open for sitting, and also in Parliament as well, because so many of the provinces are geographically so large that to bring people in for weekly meetings. We meet weekly, which is very unusual for a PAC. Most jurisdictions, they meet only when there are sittings. So they may compact more information in one meeting than what we would do.
And you know, just I hope I was clear that I wasn't suggesting an all-day meeting, but I would go on record to say, if you want me here all day, you know, I will make sure that I'm here. If you want me here twice a year, we'll come twice a year. It really is about how we serve you.
Ms. Roberts.
Just to note that also, as I understand it, the Ontario Legislature meets from September until March with like far fewer, there are far more sitting weeks in both Ontario and in Ottawa, where it's from June to September, or I mean September to June. So Nova Scotia, I think, set the fewest days of any jurisdiction last year.
Thank you. Any further questions? I would like to, we did not introduce a couple of other people in the room, and I would like to move to our legislative librarian and ask that for the members' benefit that she introduce herself and everyone else in the chamber. We'll begin with the legislative librarian.
Heather Ludlow, Legislative Library.
Kim Ledley, Committee's Office.
Gordon Hebb, Chief Legislative Counsel.
Nicole Arsenault, Assistant Clerk in the House and Manager of the Legislative Committee's Office.
And we have a couple more in the back. Or one more in the back.
Colleen Denemy answered.
Okay. So now you know who you'll be seeing in the room and who they are and what they do. Our next item on the agenda is the Legislative Council Office. And I believe Mr. Hebb will be providing some comments. And if you have any questions for him, you certainly have an opportunity to ask them after he's finished. Mr. Hebb.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thought I'd start by just, although it's old hat to many of you, just a brief description of the office as it relates to the committee. So the Legislative Council Office, in addition to myself, there are 4 other Legislative Council plus support staff. And in case you want to see us, we're on the 8th floor of the CIBC building on Barrington Street. As Legislative Council, we're the legal counsel to the House of Assembly, including the Public Accounts Committee, and we're totally nonpartisan. And despite our label, we act as both Legislative Counsel and Parliamentary Counsel. Our role here is to provide legal and procedural advice to the Chair, to the Committee, and Committee staff. It includes the preparation of subpoenas where necessary, although this is a rare event. And we can provide assistance in preparing motions that members may wish to present to the committee, and we're available to give general advice to individual members of the committee and to caucus staff assisting the committee. I have prepared about 3 pages of notes, what I've labeled committee basics, which I'm going to give out, but I just wanted to highlight just a couple items on that that I thought I should mention. You know, of course, that you invite witnesses, and I just wanted to point out that you do have the power to subpoena almost anybody here if they won't come. There are some exceptions, one of the most notable one being MLA, so you can't, for example, subpoena a minister. Witnesses must answer all questions they're asked if the committee insists, but I want to point out that that does not mean that you should insist upon all questions, because it may well be inappropriate. You should use common sense. A couple things I want to talk about that are different here than many other places. So motions, for example, do not require a seconder, although I'll often hear people trying to second a motion. They don't require a seconder. Unlike in the House, they don't require notice. Voting is quite unusual in committees in that the chair has a vote in the first instance and then has another vote if there's a tie. Points of order are permitted, but points of privilege, which members sometimes raise, you can raise points of privilege in the House. You can't raise a point of privilege in the House respecting what goes on here. The committee can raise a point of privilege in the committee, but the chair can't rule on it. And the only way it gets to the House to be ruled on is if the committee as a whole agrees to send a report to the House. to have that point of privilege resolved. Those are just a few of the points, but I'll give out these sheets with some of the other things, but that's all I have to say unless there are any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hebb. That's very helpful. We have a question from Mr. Jessam.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like Mr. Hebb to please clarify the distinction between a point of privilege and a point of order.
Okay.
I should know this by now probably, but just want to be clear.
Mr. Hebb.
Well, a point of order is a procedural point about how the meeting is proceeding. You know, whose turn it is to speak or something of that nature. A point of privilege is something that infringes on the privileges of the members of the House. The most well-known one, freedom to speak, that sort of thing. They're really quite different. One's procedural and the other relates to your privileges and the privilege of the House as a whole. These limited privileges which you as members of the House of Assembly have.
Thank you.
Without getting into a long thing on all the privileges. I mean, we could talk about privileges for half an hour or more. But
thank you. Are there any further questions for Mr. Hebb? Our meeting is scheduled to end at 10 a.m. and I will do my best to end it as close to that as possible. May I have agreement from members to extend the meeting as necessary to complete our agenda? All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion is passed. We will move to correspondence from the Office of the Auditor General. We had the 2016-17 performance report and the 2017-18 business plan. Would the Auditor General wish to make any further comments about that correspondence for the committee? Mr. Pickup.
It will be, I'll just make one comment. I wasn't going to go through the documents other than to say, certainly in serving the House and serving this committee, all of what is in that report is really thankful to the people that I have across the street that do all of this work, and I'm not going to sort of attempt to advertise the achievements we've had other than to express that without those folks doing the hard work they're doing, none of that would have been achievable. And what's been achievable, essentially in 2015 and in 2016, both of the last 2 years, we've had a record years of output in terms of the work that we've done and advancing things. And also in each of the last 3 years, we've returned a significant amount of our budget back to the government as well in terms of underspending and managing our resource as well. So it's not me, I think, it's the people, it's the 35 people across the street who are, as you will experience or have experienced, are very dedicated to the work that they do on behalf of you and on behalf of Nova Scotians as well. So I just wanted to extend that thank you to those folks because what you see in those reports really relates to the work that they all do.
Any questions on the correspondence? Hearing none, we will move to our next item, which is approval of the subcommittee record of decision. The committee met on September 13th. You have before you the record of decision, and I will ask for a motion to approve those topics. Mr. Dave Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that the topics submitted from the subcommittee be approved at full committee.
Mr. Houston? Oh, okay. You thought you needed a second. Okay, that's not required. All those in favor of the topics, Mr. Jessam.
I'd just like to point out that as our Auditor General highlighted earlier in today's meeting, with respect to a subject that will be addressed in the near future, specifically November 22nd and 29th, health and corrections audits. We believe that there will be ample opportunity for the topic of physician recruitment to be covered over the course of these two opportunities, and are recommending that the witness Department of Health and Wellness and Tony Kelly Digby Area Health Coalition be omitted from this list, and again recommend that all members of this committee save their questioning around the topic, a very important topic of physician recruitment for that point in time.
Okay, there is a motion before the floor which we, according to the rules, we should dispense with. Since I'm hearing there may be some lack of support for the motion, perhaps we'll just have the vote on the motion, then we'll carry on with Mr. Jessom's comment. All those in favor of approving the existing record of decision from the September 13th subcommittee meeting, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion is defeated. Mr. Jessom has raised the item of Department of Health and Wellness, physician recruitment. Mr. Jessom, are the other topics remaining on the list satisfactory to you? The reason I ask is to try to determine if that is the only subject that is requested to be put off for now. We perhaps could have a motion on the record of decision minus that one subject. Mr. Wilson. Sorry, Mr. Gordon Wilson. We have two Mr. Wilsons.
Thank you. Also on the initial, the first one at the top of the list, the IWK governance, and I don't want to speak out of turn. I'll ask my colleague from Pictou East also if he would like to comment on that, but I believe that it's a little preemptive right now to discuss that, seeing that the Auditor General, which thank you very much, is taking that up, and the police investigation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Any other comments? Mr. Houston.
I was pleased to see the Auditor General announce yesterday that he will be looking at the IWK. I guess I'd go back to the Auditor General and say, does he see any value in bringing the IWK before this committee over the next few weeks? Presumably could schedule, which would be in advance of your audit, which I think is scheduled for the spring release, and hopefully you'll bring your report to this committee in the spring when it's free. But I guess I would defer to the Auditor General to whether or not he would see value in this committee trying to bring the IWK before it.
Mr. Pickup.
So in answer to that, it would be, I guess, what would be the objective in bringing them? If the objective is to describe the work that's already been, that they've already done, that's one objective. If the objective is to see what our audit comes up with and the conclusions that we come out of with our audit, it may be better to wait and see what the audit results show and get the full picture after that. So because what they won't be able to do is sort of talk to the work that we are doing now. So it really is, do you want to understand what's already been done, or do you want to wait and see that we do our work and get that picture as well? So I think my response would be that way. And of course, we will report on the work we're doing on IWK, just like all of our other work. We'll be reporting to the House, which generally includes your request coming here. So,
any further questions or comments? Mr. Dave Wilson, the Honourable Dave Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do support our topic, physician recruitment, to go forward. As was indicated by the Vice Chair of Public Accounts just a few minutes ago, he suggested that potentially there'll be topics that may need more than one meeting here at the Public Accounts, and I would say that doctor recruitment would be one of those topics that Nova Scotians expect the government and all members of the House to have as a top priority. A significant amount of government funding is allocated towards physician services and recruitment. It's most fitting that Public Accounts Committee review what is going on, what are the concerns, and how do we, I think, address a serious issue. So all I'm doing is agreeing with the government members on the committee that topics should be back here. And I know from history, being on this committee for, I think, well over 8 years now, that I can guarantee you that physician recruitment will be a topic that I'll continue to bring back to this committee to make sure that the issues that we're hearing are going on in the province. So I would hope that they would reconsider and include physician recruitment, and I can guarantee the members in the government caucus that I'll be including that in future meeting requests for topics here at Public Accounts.
Thank you. Mr. Gordon Wilson.
Yes, if it's appropriate, I'd like to move that the next 3 items on the agenda list be accepted as topics, as the funding Ocean Innovative Cove Center with Duff Montgomery as the witness, the alternative procurement process in IT with internal services, and the funding for pre-primary with the Department of Education and Early Childhood Development.
Thank you. We have a motion before the committee. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion is passed. Our clerk will make note of that, and we have now approval by the full committee for those 3 subjects. We also had some other items on the record of decision, specifically some potential meetings based on the Auditor General reports. There are, as you see before you there, in-camera and public meetings. This is what came out of the subcommittee. Is there an interest to look at these topics with the Auditor General as a witness? Do members have any comments or questions about that? So I will ask perhaps a member of the committee, if you wish, to make a motion indicating if you wish to have some of those topics included for our clerk to schedule meetings with the Auditor General as a witness. Mr. Gordon Wilson.
I assume you're referencing the October 4th, November 1st, November 8th, November 22nd, and November 29th schedulings? Yes. I'd make that motion.
Okay, so the motion before the committee is to have meetings October 4th, November 1st, November 8th, November 22nd, and November 29th with the Auditor General on audit work that office has completed. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion is passed, and our clerk will make note of that decision. We just have a couple of more items on the agenda. We've spoken about them a bit already, so we'll aim not to keep you much longer. The topic of training. We have 2 offers here. One is from the Department of Finance and one is from the Canadian Audit and Accountability Foundation. With respect to the Department of Finance, I've been in attendance in the past when they have come in. They essentially can show you the books of the province. You can go through them line item by line item. You can ask questions. Sometimes the line items are not descriptive of what they actually mean. You need to ask and understand what the line item actually represents. So they are willing to come in to meet with us on a date sometime after September 27th because they are, of course, busy with the provincial budget right now. Is there an interest in having the Department of Finance come in to provide us a briefing? Any comments or questions? I open the floor. I'm sensing some agreement. Is there agreement from the committee to bring the Department of Finance in sometime after the 27th of September? All those in favor? Those opposed? Our clerk will make note of that. Mr. Pickup.
If I could make one suggestion on that, it might be worthwhile to do that before our October 4th report, given that we're coming to talk about the audit of the public accounts. There may be some benefit in that.
Let me get our calendar here. The challenge with that is unless we schedule a meeting separate of our September 27th is the next Wednesday before that. So unless we were able to schedule a meeting on a Thursday or a Friday or a Monday or a Tuesday, which is certainly possible, it is up to the members. Mr. Jessen.
I would just, I think it's a positive idea, but at the risk of, I guess, beating a dead horse, we'll have the opportunity to go through the financials and presentations from each department in the legislature over the next few weeks. And then we'll have another opportunity to address the Auditor General's perspective as well. So I know it's important to continue this, but is it so important that we can't perhaps have the department here at a later date?
It's entirely up to the committee.
Okay.
It's really the committee's business. So. Okay. I'm hearing that that there is an interest to see the Department of Finance, and we will ask the clerk to assist with scheduling that. The next opportunity for training is the Canadian Audit and Accountability Foundation, and information has been circulated about this organization. They have provided training in the past. They visited with us in the past. I would ask members, unless there are some comments today, I would ask members to perhaps go over that background material. It is something that should be discussed, and perhaps even something that the subcommittee should discuss. But I would like all members to look at the material. Has anyone looked at the material and had any thoughts about that training or any questions you may wish to ask? Or comments? No? Okay. Instead of asking for a decision on that right now, I think it is something that we should discuss as a subcommittee, but I would ask each member to have a look at the materials, think about it, think about what training you would like to have, and speak with your caucus representative, whether it's one of the Mr. Wilsons or Mr. Houston, and it's a subject we can discuss at our subcommittee meeting. So with that, unless there's further business to come before the committee, and hearing none, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.